Donald Trump called him tough. Rush Limbaugh read one of his articles live on his radio show. Ann Coulter tweeted that article to her 1.5 million followers and declared, "Every sentence is perfect." Ladies and gentlemen, your host, former chief editor of the Jewish Press, Elliot Resnick.
Welcome to the Elliot Resnick Show. Normally, every week we interview a fighter or firebrand from the political or cultural battlefields. This week, though, because it's Chol HaMoed, we're going to be doing something a bit different. I'm going to be sharing with you a speech I delivered in Naples, Florida in January of 2020. That's just 2 months before the pandemic. It's called Israel, It's Not Complex, a Black and White Perspective. It was a speech for the Southwest Florida chapter of the Zionist Organization of America, the ZOA. I apologize for the less than crystal clear recording, but I think after just maybe 30 seconds or so, you should get used to it. And next week, we're going to return to our normal schedule. Planned for next week is an interview with Dr. David Schwartz. Dr. David Schwartz is a Lubavitcher Chassid who single-handedly took on New York City and won. He's a therapist who fought the ban. New York City had passed a ban against offering any advice to men who are attracted to other men who wanted not to be attracted to other men. And Dr. Schwartz said, "I don't understand. Frum Jews, Orthodox Jews come to my office. They're asking me for advice. They have these unwanted desires. They want to either minimize this desire, overcome it, work around it. I give them advice. I don't force them to do anything. I'm just talking to them, and you're criminalizing my speech." He sued New York City. Not only did he win, not only was he going to win, he was going to win so badly that New York City was scared of the legal precedent it would set, and it overturned its own ban. New York City, the heavily Democrat New York City Council, overturned its own ban because one Lubavitcher Chassid, one therapist, one Frum therapist, and God knows why it was only one, but one therapist sued the city, and he single-handedly won. And I'm going to be talking to, actually, I already did talk to him. I have it on tape. I'm going to be releasing the interview for all of you for next week's episode. In the meantime, enjoy my lecture in Florida. In April 1936, the Arabs of Palestine launched what became known as the Great Revolt, which ultimately resulted in the death of over 400 Jews. The Arabs were not happy that the Jews were coming into Palestine in great numbers and creating a Jewish state, and they wanted it to end. So they started rioting. In response, Great Britain, which governed Palestine at the time, launched the Palestine Royal Commission headed by Lord Robert Peel to discover the causes of the unrest, as if Great Britain did not know what they were. Ultimately, they would recommend that the land be divided into two, into a Jewish state and into an Arab state, thereby becoming the first government-appointed body to recommend the two-state solution. That was 83 years ago. But before they recommended the two-state solution, they heard testimony from numerous people, numerous Jews, numerous Arabs, and numerous British officials. One of the officials to testify was David Ben-Gurion, who later would become the first Prime Minister of Israel, but at the time he was the chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency. And he testified as follows in front of the Peel Commission. Quote, "Our right in Palestine is not derived from the mandate and the Balfour Declaration. It is prior to that." And then 2 sentences later he said, "I say on behalf of the Jews that the Bible is our mandate." End quote. In other words, the land of Israel belongs to the Jews because the Bible says so, end of story. This is David Ben-Gurion, not a right-wing fanatic religious leader, but a left-wing secularist leader. The title of this evening's lecture is Israel, It's Not Complex, a Black and White Perspective. Many people think that black and white perspectives are childish, they're immature, they're unsophisticated, that the mark of an educated man is someone who sees the world not in black and white, but in gray. I believe this perspective is incorrect. Ayn Rand was once asked about black and white perspectives. Ayn Rand was the author of The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, a Jew, not the greatest Jew. She was an avowed atheist, but she also was a brilliant woman, and she was once asked about black and white perspectives, and she said the following: "What is meant by the expression black and white? It means good and evil. Before you can identify anything as gray, as middle of the road, you have to know what is black and what is white, because gray is merely a mixture of the two. And when you have established that one alternative is good and the other is evil, there is no justification for the choice of a mixture. There is no justification ever for choosing any part of what you know to be evil." And then in another context, she once wrote,
In any compromise between food and poison, it is only death that can win. Black and white perspectives are good. They're not bad. To have a black and white perspective means to be clear-eyed on what is true and what is false, on what is good and what is bad. And to be clear-eyed and to have knowledge is a virtue, not a vice. Black and white perspectives are only bad when they're the result of ignorance or naivete. So for example, when I was 5 years old, I went to Disney World and I went over to every single Disney character and gave that character a hug and a kiss. Because to me, Disney characters represented pure goodness. When you get older, you realize that inside these Disney characters are human beings. They're just in costumes. Some of these people are good and some of them are bad. So as a 5-year-old, I had a black and white perspective. When you get older, you realize maybe it's not so simple. So it's great because I was naive. I was 5 years old. Another example, a little bit closer to home. A lot of us are brought up to believe that anybody who has a beard and a black hat must be a good person because he studied a lot of Torah. The Torah is supposed to refine our characters, and therefore he must be a good person. When you get older, you realize either through personal experience or maybe you read an article in a newspaper, you realize that despite the fact that he might have studied much Torah, maybe he just was a coarse person and the Torah did not penetrate his heart and he remains a bad person. Maybe he would have been even worse had he not studied Torah. But the fact is he's not a great person. So you wind up having a great perspective, therefore, at the end about rabbis, not a black and white perspective. See, but even there, what you have is not really a great perspective, but two black and white perspectives. Let's say, for argument's sake, you have 95% of rabbis who are good. So for these 95% of rabbis, you have a black and white perspective, these people are good. For the 5% of bad rabbis, you have a black and white perspective that they are bad. It's only gray in general because if you ever see any particular rabbi, you don't know in which group that person belongs. Does he belong to the 95% group or the 5% group? So therefore, it's gray. But really, it's actually a mixture of two different black and white perspectives. Just one last example. Suppose you get a job offer in a different city. You don't know, should I go, should I not go? The whole situation is a little bit gray for you. But why is it gray? It's gray because, again, you lack knowledge. Will I be happy in this new city? Will my kids be happy? Will they have good friends? Will they have good teachers? Where will I be in 5 years? Will I like my coworkers? You don't know the answers to any of these questions, and because you don't know the answers to these questions, the whole matter is gray. It's a hard decision to make. If you had the knowledge, though, if you were God, and you had the answers to all those questions I just mentioned, you would be able to make a very clear black and white decision. So black and white decisions are good. If you have the knowledge and you've thought about the issue, a black and white perspective is actually good, not bad. And once you have a black and white perspective, you should have a black and white attitude about that perspective. You shouldn't be defensive about it. You should be offensive about it. Many of you might know the famous quote from the 1964 Republican National Convention when Barry Goldwater said, "Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue." And then one of my favorite quotes of all time comes from a Russian poet, Mikhail Svetlov. He asked, "What is a question mark?" And he answered, "It is an exclamation point that has grown old." An exclamation point is straight, it's vigorous, it's strong. When you're younger, in your teenage years, your 20s, you're excited about life, you know where you stand, you know what you want to do, you know what causes you want to fight for. When you get older, you start questioning, I don't know, maybe. A question mark, which was straight and vigorous, becomes a wishy-washy, curvy, wrinkly question mark. It is not good to be a question mark. It is a virtue to be an exclamation point. Israel is one of those black and white issues. It's clear-cut. People make it complicated, but it's actually not complicated at all. It's rather very simple. First of all, to begin with, Israel belongs to us because God says so. Anyone familiar with the Bible knows that God tells Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob on numerous occasions that he will give the land of Israel, back then known as the land of Canaan, to their descendants, i.e. the Jewish people. That is clear-cut. That's why in this country, even before there was a Jewish Zionist movement, there was a Christian Zionist movement called Restorationism. In the 19th century, the idea was we would restore the Jewish people to the land of Israel. Some people say, well, I don't quite care about the Bible. Why should we bring up the Bible? Well, first of all, the Bible is still believed by roughly 2/3 of this country. 2/3 of this country still identifies as Christian. So for them, it is a rather good argument. Second of all, the Bible claims to record the Word of God. So we're talking about a document possibly records the Word of God. We're talking about absolute truth, in other words. Maybe it doesn't, but maybe it does. So if you have a document that possibly records the Word of God, possibly records absolute truth, God's opinion on any topic is certainly just as good as Thomas Friedman's opinion or Noam Chomsky's opinion. It is worth paying attention to. And we're also Jews. We're supposed to care about our national constitution. Now, some people say again that, well, I don't care about the Bible. Maybe the Bible is, let's say you're speaking to somebody else and they might not care about the Bible. First of all, force them to say they don't care about the Bible. A lot of people are not so comfortable saying the Bible is just nonsense. They don't know enough. They haven't really thought seriously about the Bible since they've been a kid or a teenager. I had a teacher, a professor in college, a philosophy professor whom I liked very much. He once gave a talk about evolution, and he wasn't sure whether evolution was true or not. He said the scientific evidence points towards evolution being true, but he wasn't sure where the biblical evidence points towards. Is the Bible being metaphorical in the beginning of Genesis? Is it being literal? He wasn't sure, so he kept it an open question. I went over to him after the lecture and I said, but a lot of people don't care about the Bible. He answered me, do they want to say the Bible is bunk? Those were his words, the Bible is bunk. And I thought about it afterwards, and I realized most people do not want to say straightforwardly, that clearly, the Bible is bunk. Make them say that the author of the Bible is a liar. The Bible says hundreds of times, and God spoke the following words to Moses. Was the author lying? Make them say the author of the Bible is a liar. Make them say the author of the Bible is a con man. That's not going to play well in most of the country, and even most people are not super comfortable saying that. Far leftists are comfortable, but most people are not so comfortable saying that. So force them to say that. Why use the Bible altogether? Well, because it is the firmest ground on which you possibly could rest our claim to the land of Israel. It is absolute truth, and it's a divine right. There is no other nation in the world, I believe, certainly in the West, that believes it has a divine right to its country except the Jewish people. Americans don't believe they have a divine right to America. Frenchmen don't believe they have a divine right to France. Polish people don't believe they have a divine right to Poland. The Jewish people claim to have a divine right to the land. And divine right means it's a moral right. We're supposed to be there. It would be improper for us not to be there. When people who saved Jews during the Holocaust, a lot of non-Jews didn't save Jews, but those who did, when they're asked, why did you save Jews, a lot of them say, because it was the right thing to do. That is the firmest and best possible answer you could ever give for anything. It's the right thing to do. We're in Israel because we are there, we should be there by right. It would be improper, it would be immoral for us not to be there. Some people like to rest the claim to Israel on the Balfour Declaration. Once upon a time, Lord Balfour sent a notice to Lord Rothschild saying that His Majesty's government views in favor of the founding of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. That is a very wishy-washy, it's not the best grounds on which you want to rest a claim. Lord Balfour is a human being. It's not a moral right, it's not a divine right. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, who many of you probably are familiar with because his Chabad house is due to his vision, he once addressed the idea of resting your claim to Israel on the Balfour Declaration, and he said the following. He said, if you raise this issue that we have this right to Palestine because of the Balfour Declaration, they'll respond, quote, true, a Gentile did state the need of a Jewish homeland. However, now 140 Gentiles disagree. Back then, this is 1976. Back then, the United Nations had 140 delegates, not 193. Who is to say that one solitary Gentile holds the determining view? Then a few sentences later, all the tribulations that we are living through now are because Jewish people built their case based on that declaration written by a Gentile in London. You rest your claim on the Balfour Declaration, you're resting your claim on man-made law, which could change any second. People talk endlessly about international law, and they try to prove how we have right to the land because of international law. No one really cares about international law. People care about right and wrong. Leftists certainly don't care about international law. They use international law as a cudgel against their enemies. If international law was not on their side, they would drop it in a second, or they would try to change it. No one really cares at the end of the day about international law. They care about right and wrong. And you have to convince them that we are in Israel by right. Now, so I do think the Bible is the best case for us to make because we're Jews. And even if you don't want to use it for other people, we should believe it ourselves. But even without the Bible, we're in Israel because we also have a historical right to the land. We were there first and we were there last. People feel very defensive and saying, oh, we didn't really conquer it. So what? What if we did conquer it? What if we did conquer the land from the Arabs? Why is that a problem? Every nation on planet Earth is in the country that it's in now because it conquered it from somebody else. We in America conquered it from the Indians. Again, random examples. They didn't speak Spanish in Mexico 1,000 years ago. They didn't speak Portuguese in Brazil 1,000 years ago. The Anglo-Saxons were not born in England. They came from France. Every nation on this planet was once somewhere else, and they moved, they conquered another people, and that's where they are today. There is nothing wrong if we conquered land from the Arabs, and we won, and now we're there now, it's ours now, finished, end of story. There's nothing wrong with that. We don't have to feel defensive about it. If you're talking about who was there first, well, I guess in theory, once upon a time, the Girgasites were there, and the Jebusites were there, and the Canaanites were there, but none of those nations are around anymore. So of the various nations that still exist today, the Jewish people are the ones who were there first. And we were there for a long time. We had kingdoms there. King David had a kingdom. King Solomon had a kingdom. We were there for 1,000 years till the Romans kicked us out in the year 70. We were sent into exile. We never left completely. There was always a Jewish presence in the land of Israel. And then in the late 1800s, we started coming back in great numbers. And we found trespassers in our land when we came back. They should not have been there. And as soon as we came back, they should have said, well, okay, we were there because you weren't there, but now that you're back, we'll give you back your land. That's what they should have said. They didn't say it. That's their problem and their fault. We don't have to feel defensive about having conquered land. We were there first and we're there now. They don't like it. Tough luck. There's nothing to feel defensive about. And people feel defensive all the time. Every nation has stolen their land. There's nothing wrong with it. That's the way history works. We don't go back. We don't turn back the clock. So, once one is sure about one's claim, either for biblical reasons, for historical reasons, I really truly believe those are the best reasons. I don't think it's good at all to get into international law or any of those other things. We're there, it's ours, get lost is basically the message it should be to other people. Once we believe in those things, we should feel very comfortable and say that to other people. And that means, among other things, I believe, is that we shouldn't talk about Arab violence. Many times on TV and newspaper articles, you'll hear people saying the Arabs are very violent. They blow themselves up and they kill women and children. Okay, so what? Supposing they stopped killing women and children. Suppose they only killed IDF soldiers. Then what? Then we have nothing more to say? Supposing they didn't kill anybody. Supposing they were Mother Teresa's. Every single Palestinian was a Mother Teresa herself. Then what? Then you're going to give the land to them? No, I don't care. You can be the most peaceful people in the world. The land is not yours. Supposing somebody said to you, I want your house is mine. You would say, no, it's not yours, it's mine. He said, but I really think it's mine. You would say, I'm sorry, it's just not. Let's say he was a really good person. He was a Mother Teresa. So at best, maybe you would help him find a house somewhere else. You would never give away your own house. Supposing somebody said to you, give me your wife, he's my wife. You would say, you're crazy. You would say, no, it's really my wife. Would you start spending an hour proving to the person why it's not his wife, why really it's your wife? The whole question is insulting. You have to lack self-respect to spend endless time, which people do all the time, proving to other people why the country is theirs. It's the equivalent of proving somebody else that your wife is your wife and that your house is your house. It's insane. Anyone who has self-respect shouldn't do it. It's just not. It's not your land. I'm sorry if you don't accept it. I have a divine right to it. I have a historical right to it. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do about it. That should be our attitude. We should not talk about Arab violence because it doesn't get to the core of the issue. There's nothing wrong with talking about it every once in a while, but it does not get to the core of the issue. Because even if they weren't violent, the answer would still be no. Along the lines that I was just saying, my mother had an organization for several years called MATCH, Mothers Against Teaching Children to Kill and Hate. She started this organization in 1998. She discovered that there were many, the Arabs were educating their kids to blow up Jews and to conquer the land. They didn't record Israel even on their maps. And she wanted to expose this and publicize this. And she started an organization to spread the news. Now it's more well known. If you don't know about it, you probably should go. My mother's not so active anymore because it's more well known. But a great organization that highlights this all the time is Palestinian Media Watch. They watch Palestinian TV. And they record even on kids' programs. They'll have little kids reciting poems of how they want to butcher Jews, so on and so forth. Anyways, my mother was giving a lecture once, and a girl, I think it was a high school, was challenging her, who said the lands, you're ours, and it was a Jewish girl, so on and so forth. At a certain point, my mother said to the girl, give me your shoes, they're mine. The girl said, what? My mother said, they're mine, give me your shoes. The girl was flabbergasted, and she didn't know what to say, because it's so absurd. Of course they're not yours, of course they're mine. That's the same way that girl was flabbergasted and didn't understand, didn't even know how to respond because it was so absurd. That should be our attitude when someone says, give me the land of Israel, it's mine. No, it's not. It's end of story. Besides for when they challenge us in terms of PR and the way we respond, I believe we also respond incorrectly militarily. Israel does when Arabs are violent. For 30 years, the first Intifada started in the mid-'80s. So for 35 years now, Israel has not put down this Arab uprising. I believe the reason there's so much anti-Israel animus in this world is partially because of that reason. Now, of course, there are always anti-Semites, people who hate Jews, they hate the Jewish people. There will always be people who hate Israel. But it's grown exponentially in the last 35 years. And I truly think it's because of our response of how we've reacted to Arab violence. Going back to my example of the house, supposing somebody was throwing rocks at your house and said, that house is mine, I would like your house. You would call the police immediately. If the police didn't respond, you would call again 10 minutes later. If the person came back the next day, you would call the police again. If the police still didn't do anything, you would go to your councilman. There's no way in the world you would tolerate a person throwing rocks at your house day in, day out. If you did tolerate somebody throwing rocks at your house day in, day out, an outside observer might say, you know what, I'm not so sure the house is his. Because if the house was really his, there's no way he would let that person harass him day in, day out. If he's letting that person harass him day in, day out, maybe he doesn't really think the house is his. Israel, for 35 years now, has let the Arabs throw rocks, kill Jews, and refuses to put it down. Israel is 100 times stronger than the Arabs. They could crush them in a second if they wanted to. Wars used to be fought to the point of unconditional surrender. Ulysses S. Grant, U.S. Grant, was also called unconditional surrender grant. You fight until the enemy surrenders, till they hang out outside the windows, undershirts, and they surrender, and they give up all their arms. When is the last time Israel fought to the point of surrender? Never. They always fight to the point of ceasefires. They never crush the enemy. If you don't crush the enemy, you're going to have people who think maybe the land really is not yours. Because if the land was yours, you would not be reacting so weakly. I have a quote in this regard from Meir Kahane. Some of you might like, some of you might not like. But even for those of you who don't like him, he had very smart things to say on occasion. So let me read something to you he once wrote. He wrote, "If something is really yours, you leap upon it. You proclaim it so, and you take every step possible to ensure that it will be yours forever. If you do not, then your pious speeches about ownership will be met with doubt and disbelief. And on the other hand, when the other side, the Arabs, daily, hourly, and loudly shout and proclaim that the land is Palestine, what the world sees is an apparent choice between Arabs who claim that the land is theirs and who fight and die for it, and Jews who keep a status quo, which is nothing more than the occupied territories. What do we expect from an objective person?" Now, of course, a regular person should be educated enough. If you know all the facts, you're going to be on Israel's side. But if you don't know all the facts, and all you hear are the Arabs saying the land is mine, and what you hear, the Jews respond, when's the last time you heard Netanyahu say, no, the land is not yours, it's actually ours? He never says that. None of Israel's PR people ever say that. All they say is, well, the Arabs are violent, we can't give them land right now because look how corrupt they are. They never respond the land is theirs. So what a person hears is justice on this side, it's mine. The other side doesn't say you're wrong. It doesn't say, no, it's not yours, it's mine. He says, well, I can't give it to you right now. So if you don't know all the facts, over time you're going to side more and more with the Arabs. And you'll forgive them. Yes, they killed boys and girls and women and children. You'll forgive them that sin. Because at the end of the day, people care much more about right and wrong. And if they sense that the Arabs are right, and the Arabs are the only ones saying the land is theirs, and the Jews are not responding, no, you're wrong, the land is ours, over time they're going to start siding with the Arabs. And that is what has happened over the last 30, 35 years. You know, many of us, there are many Bible stories which we grew up with, and or just folklore, not just Bible stories, any sort of stories we grew up with, the boy who cries wolf, and we know these stories, and we forget the moral lessons that they actually are supposed to teach us. So all of us probably know the story of King Solomon, that there were two women with two babies, and it seems like the two women were not the most moral people. It's not clear 100%, but in any event, it seems like they were not living at home with their families. They were just living in an institution without husbands, and they were living, and they had two babies next to each other. They went to sleep, one mother next to her baby, the other mother next to her baby. In the middle of the night, one mother discovers that her baby died, and she didn't want a dead child, so she switches the babies. She takes the other mother's baby, puts it next to her, takes her dead baby, puts it next to the other mother. They wake up, and the mother sees that a dead child is next to her. And the other woman says, yes, I'm sorry, your baby died. The baby died during the night. The other mother says, what do you mean? That's not my child. That's your child. And the other woman says, no, 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 that's your child. My child is the live child. So they go to King Solomon, right? And what does King Solomon say? King Solomon says, divide the baby in half. And the mother who has the dead child says, perfect solution. That's a perfect compromise. Let's divide. Let's cut the baby in half. The true mother says, no, please, don't touch the baby. Let the other mother have the baby. Just please do not harm the baby. And King Solomon says that must be the real mother, because the real mother doesn't want her baby harmed. The same thing has happened with Israel. The Arabs say it's my baby. And the Jews, they say, no, it's not. It's our baby. They say, no, let's divide the land. Exactly like the story of King Solomon. Israel says, divide the baby. The Arabs say, don't divide the baby. We want the whole thing. It's not a fair game. You're expecting too much from people. Again, people should know all the facts, but a lot of people don't pay attention. They watch the news. They read the newspapers. They've never investigated the issue. And if all they hear are these two sides, the two mothers, one saying, I want the whole thing, the other side says, divide it, they'll go eventually with the people who say, I want the whole thing. They must be right, because they want the whole thing. There's another statement in the Talmud. This used to be quoted a lot in the 1990s. It's not quoted so much anymore, but it's the first law in this book called Bava Metzia, one of the tractates of the Talmud. The law is as follows. It says, Shnayim ochazim b'talis. If two people grab onto a talis, a talit, one person says the entire talit is mine, the other person also says the entire talit is mine. They go to court. Court doesn't know who's right, who's wrong. Court makes them both swear that at least half of it is mine, and then they both divide the talis. I don't think they divide it, I think they sell it and they divide the money. If one side says, though, the entire talit is mine, and the other side says only half the talit is mine, then the court makes one side swear that at least 3/4 is yours, makes the other side swear at least 1/4 is mine, and then it gets divided 3/4, 1/4. Again, you see what happens when you claim something entirely. When you claim something entirely, people will at least meet you halfway. If you don't claim the whole thing, if you only claim half, you're not even going to get half. You're going to get 1/4. The other side that claims the whole thing, they'll get 3/4. Now, the one last remaining issue that people have, actually, before the very last issue, I'll just say one other thing very quickly. Another response that pro-Israel people say that annoys me a lot is when they say Israel has a right to exist. I don't know why people are saying that. Do you go around saying, I have a right to exist, my kids have a right to exist? Again, it's very strange. It's a strange thing to say. If you have any measure of self-respect, why are you going around telling people you have a right to exist? Who cares if they don't think you have a right to exist? Napoleon, in the late 1700s, was told by an Australian diplomat that we are willing to recognize the French Republic's right to exist. Napoleon said that the French Republic did not require or desire recognition. It is already as the sun on the horizon in Europe. Too bad for those who do not wish to see it and derive the benefit from it. You want to recognize the French Republic? Fine. You don't want to recognize it? Also fine. It makes no difference, and it shouldn't make any difference to us. Who cares what the Arabs think? It's their problem. They want to recognize us? Wonderful. They don't want to recognize us? That's also wonderful. We shouldn't go around talking about our right to exist and not our right to exist. It really doesn't matter what people think. Last thing, people think one obstacle that gets in the way of people when they argue about Israel is they say, well, what is the world going to say? So first of all, again, let me quote Meir Kahana. He said, we're not really talking about the world, you're really talking about America. Because no one really cares what Micronesia thinks or Mongolia thinks. They care when they say, what does the world think? They mean, what does America think? So what is America going to say? We can't do X, Y, and Z because what is America going to say? Well, first of all, nowadays America, more often than not, is actually going to say fine. The Trump administration is arguably more pro-Israel than Israel is. It's happened at least twice. In my lifetime, this has never happened, that the American president has been more pro-Israel than Israel. So in August of 2019, Israel was going to allow Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar into the country. Israel has a law against allowing people who promote BDS into the country. Israel, though, is going to bend backwards, as it always does, and allow them into the country anyways. Except that one day Donald Trump tweeted out that Israel would be showing tremendous weakness if they allowed in Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. As Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib hate Israel and hate the Jewish people, they should not allow them in. Israel found itself being stuck. They didn't want to be more, moderate than Trump, and they said, fine, you can't come in. Trump forced Israel's hand. Trump forced Israel to be more pro-Israel than they otherwise would have. A second example, and this came from a news report. I wouldn't necessarily believe it because I don't believe anything the mainstream media says anymore. I mean that very sincerely. In the Jewish press, every week we have a tweet page where we post humorous or intelligent tweets. And last week or 2 weeks ago, we had a tweet from someone who said, as low as your opinion is of the mainstream media, it should be lower. And that's not an exaggeration. If you follow anything, you realize after a while they misrepresent, they lie, and they sometimes even lie in the story. The headline will say one thing, and then when you're reading the story proves that their headline is false, and they do it anyways. It's bizarre, but they do that all the time. So with that having been said, there was a report, though, that Netanyahu asked Trump to send American aid to the Palestinian Authority. America gives a lot of aid to the Palestinian Authority, but it held back several hundred millions of dollars. And contrary to popular belief, Netanyahu actually, and Israel in general, often likes giving the Palestinian Authority money because they're afraid if the Palestinian Authority collapses, Hamas is going to take over. And Hamas is very radical, as opposed to the Palestinian Authority, which is quote-unquote moderate. Again, to quote Meir Kahana, he says, a moderate is an Arab who believes in killing Jews moderately. The Palestinian Authority, they all the time say they want to destroy Israel, they want to kill Jews, but officially the Palestinian Authority is moderate. So Netanyahu wanted America to transfer hundreds of millions of dollars to the Palestinian Authority security system to keep it where it is. And Trump told Netanyahu, if you want to pay them money, give them hundreds of millions of dollars, you go ahead. I'm not going to give American tax dollars to pay for a corrupt, murderous regime. Again, Trump was more pro-Israel than Israel was. So more often than not nowadays, America would have no problem with most things that Israel would do. But on occasion, they would have a problem. That is true, they would have a problem. Okay, America is not the only country in the world. There are other countries in the world. There's Russia, there's China, there's India. Now, I know these are not the nicest countries in the world, but allies, it's not about being nice and not being nice. Allies are about interests. America is not an ally with Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia is a nice country. It's not an ally with China because China is a nice country. Countries are allies with one another because they have interests that align with one another. Israel could survive with alliances with either India, Russia, or China if they wanted to. As it is, they already have strong relations with all three. And of course, if Israel even gave a hint that they were going to any of those three countries, America would run after it. America does not want Israel to have a relationship with those countries. Israel used to sell a lot of arms to China. It hasn't sold any arms roughly in the last 15 years. Why? Because America said, we don't want you to. In 2000, Israel was supposed to sell the Phantom system, which is an airborne, I forget what it's called, an airborne reconnaissance system. It sort of senses where planes are from a long way away. It was supposed to be $1 billion Israel was going to get from it, and Israel canceled the deal. Why? Because America asked it to cancel the deal. Another example, in the 1980s, some of you might remember, I don't, but some of you might remember, Israel had a Lavi project. It was a fighter jet that Israel was developing. And they canceled it, and they ended this project in 1987. Why? Because America asked it to. America didn't want Israel creating its own fighter jet. Why? Among other reasons, because America wanted Israel spending money in America, buying America jets. Second of all, if Israel had jets, they would start exporting jets, and Israel would be a competitor with America around the world selling fighter jets. America didn't want that competition, and Israel voted 12-11 to get rid of the Lavi fighter jet project because America pressured it to. There are a lot of America wants Israel to buy arms from it. It doesn't want Israel buying arms from other places. But the examples I just shared with you show that Israel has cards to play. It's not completely dependent on America. It doesn't have to do whatever America says. There are many cards it could play. It could say, we'll go elsewhere. And America doesn't want it to go elsewhere. It's not so simple that America has a stronghold on Israel. It really does not have a stronghold on Israel. There are other reasons why Israel should not worry all that much about what America says. First of all, how much money does America give to Israel annually? It gives Israel $3.5 billion. Israel's GDP is $380 billion. You're telling me that Israel could not survive minus $3.5 billion? Israel, a country, the state of the Jewish nation, a people that has won 25% of the Nobel Prizes ever awarded in the history of the Nobel Prize. Israel could not survive without $3.5 billion of American aid? Please, give me a break. We have an inferiority complex. We want to be attached to America for some reason. I don't know why. We do not have to be attached to America. I would love to be attached to America. I love America. I love George Washington. I love Thomas Jefferson. I would die for America tomorrow. It's not that I would never want to ally myself with India, Russia, or China. But at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for your country. And if temporarily you had to ally yourselves with them and not be tied to the aid, the American aid, then do that. But you can't let your own countrymen die, and you can't risk your own security because you want to be tied to America. America also did not support Israel throughout its whole history. We have this notion, again, we can't survive without America. Really? In 1948 and 1967, we survived without America. America started giving aid in heavy doses to Israel only around the Yom Kippur Wars. In 48 and 67, when we were far weaker than we are today, we got essentially no American aid. Everyone remembers that 11 minutes after Israel was founded that Harry Truman recognized Israel. What people forget is that, yes, he recognized Israel, but he also imposed an arms embargo on Israel. You couldn't send arms to Israel. If you sent arms to Israel, you could get arrested. The godfather of the Israeli Air Force, Al Schwimmer, was an American. He was stripped of his American citizenship for shipping arms and shipping planes to Israel. Stripped of his American citizenship. It wasn't restored until 40 years later under Bill Clinton, 50 years later. And Israel survived. How did they survive? They got arms from Czechoslovakia, and they got arms from France. And those were not very likely countries to get arms from. A lot of people think France is anti-Semitic. Whether it is or it isn't, it's not the friendliest country in the world. We got our arms from France. We got our arms from Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was under the orbit of the Soviet Union. But Stalin, for his own reasons, decided in that period that he wanted to help Israel, and he helped Israel. It is not the case that we cannot survive without America. We survived when we were much weaker, and we can certainly survive without America today. When did the relationship between Israel and America start? It started roughly, like I said, the Yom Kippur War, when Israel was strong, because America wants a strong ally, it doesn't want a weak ally. I just also want to revisit, though, the Czechoslovakia. Part of what I do, I became the editor of the Jewish Press in March 2018, but I've been with the paper for 14 years now. And I have done, over the last 14 years, many interviews, heads of organizations, authors of books. Among the people I interviewed was Nancy Spielberg, who's Steven Spielberg's sister, and she makes documentaries. One of the documentaries she made was Above and Beyond, which is a story of the Israeli Air Force. And it's a remarkable story. And Israel basically had no Air Force because Great Britain didn't allow it to develop planes. But they needed an Air Force, so there were pilots from America, from Canada, from South Africa who wanted to help Israel. A lot of them were Jews, not all of them, but they wanted to help Israel. They were afraid Israel would be annihilated, and they came to Israel and they helped fight planes. Where did these planes come from, though? A lot of them came from Czechoslovakia. A lot of them came from Nazi factories. These were factories that made Nazi planes. And the Jews made planes in these Nazi factories. Some of these pilots were wearing parachutes that Nazi pilots had worn. This is how Israel got some of its planes, from Czechoslovakia. And arguably, these planes saved Israel. If you watch that documentary or read, there's another book that came out, I think it's called Israel's Miracle Men or something like that, or Miracle Men in the Air, something like that. The Egyptian army was marching towards Tel Aviv. They were 25 miles away. And before that, Egypt was bombing Tel Aviv. And the Jews couldn't do anything about it because they didn't have any planes to fight back. But then they were developing these planes in Czechoslovakia and from other places. As a brief aside, by the way, they got some planes from England. They got planes from a few places. Some of the planes they got from England, they couldn't take them out of England legally. So what a person did, he was an agent from Israel, he said, I want to make a movie. And the movie required planes. And they shot a scene of pilots saying goodbye to their girlfriends, and they kissed them goodbye. It was part of a movie. It wasn't a real movie. The whole thing was fake. He said, I want to make a movie. He got approved by the government to make a movie. And then the scene when the planes leave and they're leaving, the planes left and they never came back. They flew to Israel. No, it's true. It's true. Israel got some of that's how they got some of their planes. So, I mean, our history in general is miraculous. But in any event, so this Egyptian army was coming towards Tel Aviv. They were 25 miles away. And Israel had just gotten these 4 planes from Czechoslovakia. the planes came in different spurts. I think the first one was from Czechoslovakia. Some planes came from England later. Some other planes came from America, through South America, I believe. They came in different waves, but the first ones were from Czechoslovakia. And these 4 planes flew over the Egyptian column of troops marching towards Tel Aviv, and they bombed them. The guns jammed because the planes were not the greatest, but they dropped a few bombs and had more of a psychological effect than anything else, because the Egyptians didn't realize that Israel had any planes. And they thought, well, they have these 4 planes, maybe they even have more planes, and they never advanced past that point. And the same thing with Jordan. The Jordanian Iraqi army was marching towards Israel, and they too, the same Messerschmitt airplanes, flew against them, dropped a few bombs, not more than a few bombs, but again, it had a psychological effect. Oh my gosh, the Jews have planes, and that the advance basically stopped there, never really went past that point. So anyways, I get some of the advantages of learning these stories when I interview these people as part of my job. So that was one of the stories I learned from Nancy Spielberg, and then the author from another book. So the relationship is not one way. The relationship is two-way. Even the military aid is a two-way relationship. And by the way, it's only military aid. We used to get economic aid. We haven't gotten economic aid in 15 years or so. And Israel does not even want economic aid. They only want military aid now. And that's a two-way relationship. Where is that military aid spent? Is it spent in Israel? No. The overwhelming majority of it is spent here in America. So it's American money from the government going to Israel to be spent in American arms manufacturing companies here in America. So it's not exactly a gift to Israel. It's also a gift to the American economy and the American arms industry is what it is also. It also benefits America in many ways. For one, Israel flies a lot of these planes, F-35, F-16s. They fly them much more often than America flies them. And when they fly them, they tell America, here's this problem. You need to make an adjustment here. Apparently, the F-16 made 600 adjustments based on Israeli feedback. Yoram Ettinger, who's the president of America-Israel Opportunities, he said at CPAC last year, if any of you have been to CPAC, if you're a conservative, you'll like CPAC a lot. So I encourage you to go if you're a conservative. If you're not a conservative, probably don't go. But Yoram Ettinger said at the CPAC conference, he said he once asked the plant manager of, I think it was Lockheed Martin, what is Israel's feedback worth to you? All these recommendations it makes to you and all these upgrades you make to the planes based on Israeli information. He said it's a mega billion-dollar bonanza. Those are the words he told him, a mega billion-dollar bonanza, the information Israel gives to Lockheed Martin. That is military aid. Even military aid is kind of a two-way street. Then there's also technological know-how. Israel is a tech giant. It is a startup nation. In 2019, the top 100 inventions of the year by Time magazine, 9 of them were Israeli inventions. And some of these inventions are really fascinating. One of them, I think, is called MyCam. You plug it on your glasses if you're blind. This little camera looks at faces, it recognizes faces. It could read books, it could read barcodes, and then has a little microphone in your ear, and it will tell you you are looking at a cereal box. You are looking at your friend Mary. And it'll start reading a book to you. An Israeli invention. You probably have heard also possibly of WaterGen. I was just editing an article this past week that was talking about WaterGen. It's an Israeli company, literally makes water out of air. Because air always has a little bit of humidity in it. It makes water out of air. And that's very helpful in certain countries, in disaster zones, places that don't have a lot of water. This invention is going all around the world now. It's an Israeli invention. Israel is a tech giant. I believe there are 250 high-tech American companies that have research and development centers in Israel. American companies benefit tremendously from these research and development companies. They benefit tremendously from having all these bases in Israel. America wants that relationship. America would never want to sacrifice what they gain from Israel. It is a two-way street. A lot of us are defensive all the time. We say, I don't know, we need America, we have to have America, and after all, America's being nice to us, we have to listen. No, America's not just being nice to us. They need us and want us just as much as we need and want them. And even in theory, if they didn't want us, they drop us tomorrow, there are other countries to turn to. And by the way, even the worst case scenario, I don't think it would come to this in a million years, but I personally would rather live in a third world country that's independent and proud than a first world country that's always dependent on somebody else. Do you really want to be dependent on somebody else? In Israel, you can't let out your kid walk at night in certain places. You're afraid he might be murdered. You have these bypass roads all over the place. Who wants to live in a country like that? I'd much rather live in a poor country that's independent and safe than a dangerous country that's dependent on somebody else. Now, again, I don't think it would come to that in a million years. Israel has so many cards to play, but even then, we should not be defensive. Last thing about the two-way relationship is, of course, intelligence. Israel provides America a tremendous amount of intelligence. Just last year, or maybe it was 2018, Israel foiled a terrorist attack on a plane that was supposed to leave Sydney, taking off from Sydney, going to somewhere in the Middle East. Israel had information that the plane was going to be blown up. It gave that information to Australia. The terrorist attack was foiled. Israel does that on a regular basis. It's not the only example where Israel saved people around the world from terror attacks. Israel knows more about countries next to it than America does. I once interviewed Dan Raviv, who used to be a CBS News correspondent. Now he's a Washington correspondent for I-24. And he told me, and he had written a book called Spies Against Armageddon. And he said Israel has more information about Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria than America does. He also told me that Israel still has spies like Eli Cohen, whereas America doesn't. He said the Soviets used to do that, having sleeper spies for 50 years. He said Israel, as far as he knows, he couldn't get into more specific information, based on all of his contacts in the intelligence community, Israel still has Eli Cohen-type spies, long-term spies in Arab countries. He said America does not have such type of spies. Israel gives America a lot of intelligence. America needs that Israeli intelligence. An interesting aside, also, how did that relationship start between the Mossad and the CIA? So when I interviewed him, it's also in his book, it's also a fluke in many ways. It's a very interesting story. The relationship between the Mossad and the CIA started in 1956. That was the year when Khrushchev had given a secret speech all about Stalin's crimes, because Stalin had done terrible things, and Khrushchev admitted in the Communist Party, yes, Stalin had committed atrocities, and we have to sort of, scale back a little bit. Apparently, all the Western countries wanted a copy of that speech, or the secret speech. America could not get its hold on that speech. There was a Jew in Poland who had a girlfriend who worked in the Polish Communist Party. He went to visit his girlfriend. Moscow had just sent a copy of that speech to the Communist Party in Poland. When he was visiting his girlfriend, he saw a copy of the speech on a desk. He made some sort of excuse. He got a hold of that speech. He made copies. He brought it to the Israeli embassy. It was shipped back to Israel. Ben-Gurion immediately shared it with the CIA. The CIA was utterly shocked that Israel, which was 8 years old at the time, had gotten a hold of a speech that the CIA couldn't get a hold of. And that is when the relationship between Israel and America began. Which brings me to my last point. We are the chosen people. We are chosen by God, chosen by Him to spread His word, not to hide His word. And when we do the right thing and we stand up for the right causes, He will help us. The fact that this person saw the speech on a table visiting his girlfriend in Poland, it's a fluke. But flukes could go one way or they could go the other way. And God runs everything, of course. He runs nature too, but He's particularly evident in flukes. A fluke going this way, a fluke going that way. If we do the right thing, we stand up for Him, we stand up for the truth, He will help us. And with that, thank you very much.
All right, that does it for us. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for next week's episode of The Elliot Resnick Show.